"You're too weak to be my guard." She laughed until he dropped 8 assassins in seconds. The sandstorm hit Talis 4's diplomatic compound like a living thing, screaming against reinforced transparasteel with enough force to make the walls hum. Adrian Cole stood in the Security Operations Center, one hand braced against the console displaying perimeter feeds that showed nothing but orange chaos, and felt the old familiar tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. 3 years since Archeon Station. 3 years since he'd stood in another operations center, watching feeds that showed everything was fine, right up until Ambassador Chen's blood painted the corridor walls. 3 years of desk work and psych evaluations, and the recurring dream where he arrived 30 seconds earlier and everything was different. Director Okonkwo's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Adrian, the Kryn delegation's transport just touched down. They're coming in through the east airlock." Adrian's fingers moved across the console, pulling up interior camera feeds with practiced efficiency. "Copy. Escort route is clear. Security teams positioned at checkpoints 3 and 7. "Good, and Adrian?" Okonkwo's tone softened slightly. "You're ready for this. Trust your instincts." Adrian said nothing. Trusting his instincts was what had gotten Ambassador Chen killed. The storm's howl dropped to a low moan as the Kryn delegation entered through the pressurized airlock, and Adrian's first glimpse of Ambassador Varith Solan came through the security feed. 7 feet of lethal grace, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had never questioned their place in the universe. Her pale skin caught the harsh overhead lighting, throwing subtle silver-blue shadows across bone structure that seemed designed to unsettle. 6 warriors flanked her, massive and armored, but Adrian's gaze kept returning to her face. High cheekbones, full lips painted the color of fresh arterial blood, eyes like winter ice with pupils that contracted to vertical slits in the bright corridor. Beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp enough to draw blood just by looking. The main hall had been arranged for the security briefing, a circular space with too many entry points for Adrian's comfort, though he'd positioned personnel to cover each one. Human delegates clustered near the western wall, their formal diplomatic attire looking almost quaint against the Kryn warriors' armor. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and the particular tension that came from putting 2 species in a room when those species had spent the last 30 years trying to kill each other. Varith entered first, and the humans instinctively stepped back. Not from conscious decision, but from something older, some primal recognition that predators required distance. She swept the room with a gaze that dismissed everything it touched, then settled into a chair that looked fragile under her frame. Her warriors arranged themselves behind her in a formation that was simultaneously protective and threatening. Dr. Mendez, the human delegation's chief negotiator, cleared her throat. "Ambassador Solan, thank you for agreeing to these preliminary security protocols. Given recent intelligence about potential threats to the summit, we've assigned dedicated protection details to all key personnel." Varith's expression didn't change. "Kryn do not hide behind guards." "Nevertheless," Mendez continued, her voice steady despite the open contempt radiating from the Kryn side of the room, "regulations require it. Your personal protection officer will be Agent Adrian Cole from the Diplomatic Security Service." Adrian stepped forward from his position near the eastern entrance. He'd chosen his usual tactical gear, dark, functional, nothing that would restrict movement. At 6 feet and a lean 180, he knew exactly how he looked next to Kryn warriors who averaged 7'2" and 300 pounds of muscle. Varith's gaze tracked him as he crossed the room, and something flickered behind those ice-blue eyes. Amusement, maybe, or pity. When he stopped 3 paces from her chair, she leaned back and laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, rich sound that echoed off the walls and made every human in the room tense. "This?" Her voice carried the formal cadence of someone speaking a second language flawlessly, but without loosening the grammatical precision. "You assign me a scholar playing at soldier? Look at him. He would break if I breathed on him too harshly." Heat crawled up Adrian's neck, but he kept his expression neutral, his voice even. "Ma'am, if we could review the threat assessment." "Threat assessment. She repeated the words like they tasted amusing. "You speak of shadows and cowards who dare not face their enemies in honest combat. I am Kryn. I require no guard who could not best me in single combat, and you, little human, would not last 10 seconds." One of her warriors, a massive male with ridge patterns scarring his neck and arms, made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been a growl. The others shifted, their body language radiating the same casual superiority. Adrian met Varith's gaze and held it. "Protection isn't about personal combat capability, Ambassador. It's about threat recognition, tactical positioning, and keeping you alive regardless of what comes through that door." "Then you admit you are weak." "I admit I understand that strength takes different forms." Her lip curled, and she turned away, effectively dismissing him. "I will tolerate this charade because my government demands it, but do not imagine yourself capable of protecting anything, Agent Cole. Remain out of my way, and perhaps you will not embarrass yourself further." The briefing continued with Adrian outlining security protocols while Varith stared at the wall behind him as though he didn't exist. When he finished, she rose without acknowledgement and swept from the hall with her warriors in formation, leaving Adrian standing alone in the center of the room while human delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mendez approached, her expression tight. "That went well." Adrian's jaw ached from clenching it. "She'll come around. Will she, or will this entire summit collapse because neither side can see past their own definitions of strength?" Adrian didn't answer. He was already reviewing the security feeds again, checking sight lines and access points, because whether Varith believed he could protect her or not, it remained his job to keep her breathing. That evening, the attack came during the shift change at 2200 hours. Adrian was reviewing patrol rotations in his quarters when the alert pinged. Motion sensors tripping in sequence along the eastern corridor, too fast and too coordinated to be anything but hostile movement. He was out the door and running before his conscious mind caught up, his sidearm drawn but held low as he moved through the compound's maze of passages. The assassins wore environmental suits modified with sound dampening and thermal masking, but Adrian had spent 3 years studying how people moved when they intended violence. He saw the lead operative round the corner 15 meters ahead, saw the way weight shifted forward, the angle of the weapon, the purposeful efficiency of someone moving toward a target. Adrian didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in 4 strides and drove his palm into the operative's elbow joint, hyperextending it with a wet crack that sent the weapon clattering, swept the leg. Used the falling body as a shield against the second operative's gunfire. Caught the weapon as it fell and cleared the chamber in the same motion, rendering it useless, then drove his elbow into the second operative's throat hard enough to crush the windpipe. 2 down in 4 seconds. The remaining 6 came at him in coordinated formation, professionals who knew their business, and Adrian let the old training take over. Environment became weapon. He used the narrow corridor to limit their angles, forced them to approach in pairs where superior numbers meant nothing. Read their movements half a second before they executed them. Redirected knife strikes into friendly flesh, shattered a kneecap with a heel strike. Broke fingers gripping a pistol and turned the weapon against its owner. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just the brutal mathematics of violence reduced to its most efficient form. The final operative managed to draw a blade before Adrian caught his wrist, twisted until bones ground together, and applied pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of the thumb. The operative's legs buckled, and Adrian guided him down to the floor, keeping the pressure steady while his other hand secured the knife. "Who sent you?" The operative's mask hid his expression, but Adrian felt the moment resistance broke, felt the body's admission of defeat even before words came. "Shadow Pact contract, both sides want war." Footsteps behind him. Adrian's hand moved to his sidearm before he recognized the sound, heavier than human, the particular rhythm of Kryn movement. Varith stood at the corridor junction, her ceremonial armor catching the emergency lighting. She stared at the 8 bodies scattered across 15 meters of blood-stained floor, at Adrian kneeling calmly over the final operative, with one hand maintaining pressure and the other holding a knife that dripped red onto the deck. Her ice-blue eyes moved from the bodies to Adrian's face, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite respect, not yet, but assessment, cold and calculating, replacing the contempt from earlier. She approached slowly, stepping over unconscious operatives without looking down, and stopped 3 paces away. Close enough that Adrian could see her pupils dilate, could smell something like ozone and metal that might have been her natural scent, or might have been the aftermath of violence. "Perhaps," she said quietly, her formal cadence unchanged but her tone carrying new weight. "I misjudged you, Agent Cole." Adrian met her gaze, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline still singing through his veins. "Judgment requires observation, Ambassador. You're welcome to observe as long as necessary." For 3 heartbeats, neither moved. Then Veyrith's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held more warmth than anything she'd shown him before. The compound's alarm began screaming, medical teams pouring into the corridor, but Adrian kept his eyes on hers until she finally turned away, and he wondered if she could hear his heart hammering against his ribs the same way he could hear hers. The interrogation of the surviving assassins yielded one inescapable conclusion. Someone inside the diplomatic compound had provided security rotations, room assignments, and patrol patterns. Adrian stood in the operations center 40 hours after the attack, staring at communication logs while his gut insisted the answer was right there if he could just see it. Director Okonkwo's face filled the secure comm screen, exhaustion etching lines around his eyes. The summit continues. Ambassador Solon moves to the secondary site at Aranth Canyon. You'll escort her via armored transport, departure at 0600. Adrian checked his chrono. 4 hours until departure. He pulled up personnel files again, searching for patterns he'd missed. "You are still awake." Adrian's hand dropped to his sidearm before his mind registered Veyrith's voice. She stood in the doorway wearing dark, fitted material instead of armor, her black hair loose around her shoulders. Without the ceremonial trappings, she looked younger, less like a weapon on display. "Can't sleep." She moved into the room, stopping 3 meters away, close enough to converse, far enough to avoid crowding. "Neither can I. Rest requires trust, and I question who in this compound wishes me alive." Adrian gestured at the empty chair. "You're welcome to question with company." They sat in silence while Adrian worked through logs and Veyrith watched with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "What you did in that corridor," she finally said, "I have never seen a human fight that way. Most humans don't train for it. You moved as though you could read their intentions before they executed them. And," Adrian pulled up a new data set. "Pattern recognition. Humans aren't as strong or fast as Kryn, so we compensate by learning to predict. Body language, weight distribution, where eyes track, it all tells a story. This is what you meant. Strength takes different forms. Part of it, we also use environment, psychology, timing, make the opponent's advantages irrelevant by controlling context." Veyrith leaned forward, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the console's glow. "Teach me." Adrian's hands stilled. He searched her expression for mockery but found only genuine interest. "You want to learn human combat techniques? I want to understand how you dropped 8 trained operatives in 48 seconds using methods I have never encountered. My people believe strength lies in overwhelming force. You demonstrated an entirely different philosophy, and I am not fool enough to dismiss effectiveness simply because it contradicts my training." Something loosened in Adrian's chest. "It's not something I can teach in one night." "Then teach me over many nights." She held his gaze, pupils dilating until the ice blue was nearly eclipsed. "We have time during this summit, unless you believe I am incapable of learning." "I think you're capable of anything you decide to do, Ambassador." "Veyrith, if we are to work together, use my name." "Adrian." She repeated it, her accent turning it foreign with harder consonants and a rolled R. "Adrian, tell me about the mission that haunts you." His hands clenched on the console edge. "That's not... You carry guilt like a physical weight. I see it in how you triple-check every system, how you position yourself to watch all entrances simultaneously. You failed to protect someone." The words should have felt invasive, but her tone carried no judgment. "Ambassador Chen, 3 years ago, Archeon Station. I cleared the route, verified security, and walked her into an ambush because I missed one detail. By the time I realized the threat, she was already down. I killed all 4 attackers, but I was 30 seconds too slow." Varith was quiet for a moment. "And yet you continue this work." "It's all I know how to do." "No, you continue because you believe you owe a debt to the dead. I understand this. Kryn warriors carry our dead as well. Every warrior lost under my command becomes a weight I carry into the next battle." Adrian met her eyes and found recognition there, not sympathy, but understanding. "How do you manage it?" "I do not. I carry it and I use it to make myself sharper, more careful. The dead do not release us from our debts. They make us better warriors, or they destroy us. You have chosen to become better." Something warm moved through her expression. "You are still sharp, Adrian Cole. Do not let the dead convince you otherwise." The moment stretched heavy between them. Then Adrian's console chimed, breaking the spell. "Transport leaves in 3 hours. You should rest." Varith rose but paused at the doorway. "Tomorrow, during the journey, you will begin teaching me your methods. And Adrian, thank you for trusting me with your dead. I do not take such trust lightly." The armored transport rumbled through canyon country 2 hours into the journey when Varith turned from the viewport. "Explain your pattern recognition. How do you read violence before it happens?" Adrian leaned forward. "Most people telegraph intentions through micro-expressions and body mechanics. If someone's going to throw a punch, their weight shifts first, usually to the rear foot. Their shoulder dips, eyes flick to the target. Happens in fractions of a second, but if you train yourself to recognize those tells, you can respond before the action completes." "Show me." They stood in the limited space, Varith towering over him. Adrian demonstrated intercepting her strikes by reading the tells before her fists moved. By the 15th repetition, she'd eliminated half her signals and was forcing him to read smaller and smaller cues. "You're adapting faster than anyone I've trained with." Kryn learned combat from childhood. I simply never considered that preparation itself could be a vulnerability. She struck again, faster, and the transport hit rough terrain. Adrian stumbled into her, and Varith's hands caught his shoulders with controlled power. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen. Adrian's hands braced against her abdomen, where armor gave way to flexible material beneath, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin and smell that ozone metal scent clearly. Her pupils dilated. Your heart rate increased. Adrian's mouth went dry. "Adrenaline, from the training." "Is that what you call it?" The transport lurched again, forcing them apart. Varith settled back with predatory satisfaction while Adrian's pulse hammered in his ears. The Aranth Canyon facility carved into the cliff face like a fortress. That evening, Adrian found Varith at the observation deck, staring at the vast emptiness under 3 moons. "I could not live here," she said quietly. "So much empty space, no enemies to fight. It would drive me to madness." Adrian stood beside her. "Is that all life is to Kryn, finding things to fight?" "It is how we prove our worth. A warrior who does not fight has no value." "What about a warrior who fights for something other than themselves? You're here negotiating peace. That's harder than war. It requires more courage to choose compromise than violence." Varith's expression flickered. "You see me differently than my people do." "I see you as someone who fights with words because those are the weapons this battle requires. That takes more strength than swinging a blade." She moved closer, near enough that Adrian had to tilt his head back. "You challenge assumptions I have carried since childhood." "Does that bother you?" "It terrifies me, because if you are correct, then everything I have built my identity upon may be flawed, and I do not know who I am without that foundation." Adrian's hand moved before his brain authorized it, touching her arm where pale skin met armor. She stiffened, but didn't pull away. "You're still figuring out who you are. That's not weakness, it's growth." They stood like that, his hand on her arm and her eyes searching his face. Then footsteps echoed behind them. They separated as War Master Tekor emerged onto the deck. The massive Kryn's pale eyes tracked from Varith to Adrian, his expression hardening. "Ambassador, your presence is required for the evening briefing." Varith's shoulders squared. "I will attend shortly, War Master." "The briefing has already begun. Your continued association with the human is being noted by our delegation." The words carried weight, warning and threat combined. Varith gave Adrian a brief nod before following Tekor. The War Master's gaze lingered on Adrian for 3 seconds, promising violence without speaking. The attack came 2 days later during a formal reception. Adrian was scanning the crowd when the explosion tore through the hall's western wall, shattering transparisteel and sending bodies flying. He grabbed Varith and pulled her behind a structural column as debris rained down. "Stay behind me. Then protect the civilians while I handle the shooters." He moved into the chaos, sidearm drawn. 3 masked operatives advanced through smoke, and Adrian dropped the first with 2 rounds before the others could adjust. Varith appeared beside him, catching an operative's weapon arm and twisting with enough force to snap bone, then driving her palm into his chest hard enough to crack ribs. They moved through the hall in synchronization, Adrian's precise targeting complementing Varith's physical dominance. Within 90 seconds, the immediate threat was neutralized. They found Dr. Mendez trapped under collapsed ceiling. Varith lifted the debris while Adrian pulled the doctor free. Then they cleared the facility together in tactical formation. They found the final 2 operatives attempting escape through a maintenance corridor. The fight was brief. Adrian disarmed one, while Varith crushed the other against the wall. When the last operative hit the ground, they stood breathing hard, covered in blood and debris. Varith's hand found his shoulder, steadying herself, and her touch lingered. Adrian turned to face her, close enough to see her pupils blown wide, to feel her breath. "Are you hurt? Minor bruises, you?" "Nothing serious." Her hand slid down his arm, fingers catching his wrist where his pulse hammered visibly. She stared at that pulse point with intensity that made his breath catch. "Your heart rate is elevated again." "Combat does that. Is that what this is?" Her thumb pressed against his wrist. "Combat?" Adrian lifted his hand and touched her face where blood streaked across pale skin. Her eyes closed briefly at the contact, and when they opened, something had shifted irrevocably. "Varith." Footsteps echoed. They separated quickly, but not before War Master Tekor rounded the corner and saw them standing inches apart, saw Varith's hand still on Adrian's wrist, saw the way they looked at each other. His expression went glacial. "Ambassador, the facility is secure. Your presence is required in the command center immediately." Varith straightened, her hand dropping away. "Inform them I will attend shortly." "Your presence is required immediately. The delegation has questions about your priorities during the attack." The threat was clear. Varith gave Adrian one last look, something that might have been apology or promise, before following Tekor. Adrian stood alone, his wrist still warm where she'd touched it, knowing they just crossed a line neither could uncross. Director Okonkwo's face on the secure comm screen looked haggard, exhaustion carving lines around his mouth. "Adrian, your closeness with Ambassador Solan is being noticed by both delegations. It could be weaponized by those wanting the summit to fail." Adrian kept his expression neutral. "Sir, keeping her alive remains my only priority." "I know, but be careful. I can't protect you if you cross certain lines." The screen went dark. Adrian sat alone, thinking about Varith's hand on his wrist, about how right it had felt to fight beside her. 3 corridors away, Varith faced War Master Tekor in her quarters, his massive frame radiating barely contained anger, while her 5 other warriors flanked him in silent judgment. "You dishonor yourself, Ambassador." Tekor's voice carried formal accusation. "Your attachment to the human weakens your position and embarrasses our people." "My personal associations are not your concern, War Master." "Everything you do reflects on the sovereignty. You were sent to negotiate from strength, not to develop inappropriate bonds with inferior species." He stepped closer. Remember what you are, Varith. Remember who you serve. I remember perfectly, do you? Something cold flickered behind Tekor's pale eyes before he inclined his head and withdrew with his warriors. Varith stood alone, hands clenched, wondering when her loyalty had begun to feel like a cage. 3 days later, the first explosion ripped through the conference center's foundation during crucial negotiations. The blast buckled the floor, sending the table sliding sideways. Secondary charges followed in rapid sequence, precisely placed to maximize structural damage. Adrian moved before the scream started, crossing chaos toward Varith. She'd thrown herself over Dr. Mendez, using her body as a shield. When Adrian reached them, her eyes found his with raw relief. Get her out! Adrian grabbed Mendez and half-carried her toward the emergency exit, while Varith rallied delegates. They made it into the corridor as the conference room collapsed, dust and smoke billowing after them. Emergency protocols sealed sections, routing everyone to safe zones. Adrian handed Mendez to medical personnel, then turned to find Varith, but Tekor's warriors had already surrounded her, moving her toward the Kryn secure area. Their eyes met across the corridor for one brief moment, before she disappeared behind reinforced doors. Adrian reviewed footage in the security center, tracking charge placement, analyzing the sophistication, military-grade explosives, expert placement, intimate knowledge of structural weaknesses. This was a professional military operation. He pulled up personnel access logs and his blood ran cold. Tekor's warriors, all 6, rotating through maintenance corridors they had no legitimate reason to access. Adrian's hands moved across the console, pulling communication records. There, encrypted transmissions from Tekor's personal unit to an unknown recipient, frequency matching known Shadow Pact protocols. Tekor wasn't just hostile, he was actively sabotaging the peace. Adrian compiled the evidence and headed for the Kryn delegation's quarters. He made it 3 corridors before security grabbed him. 2 human guards moving with mechanical efficiency. They secured his arms before he could react. Adrian Cole, you're being detained on suspicion of espionage and unauthorized access to classified systems. Director Okonkwo's voice came through their comm unit. You have the right to... Sir, I have evidence Tekor is working with the Shadow Pact. He planted those explosives. He's planning something at the treaty signing. That evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance of a foreign diplomatic delegation. Adrian, what the hell were you thinking? I was thinking about keeping people alive. You've crossed a line I can't uncross. I'm sorry. They took him to a holding cell, small room, reinforced walls, single cot, removed his comm unit, his sidearm, everything. Hours passed while Adrian paced, mind racing through scenarios that didn't exist. The door's locking mechanism disengaged with a pneumatic hiss. Adrian spun, expecting guards, and found Varith. She filled the doorway in full combat armor, hair pulled back severely. Behind her, 2 unconscious guards lay in the corridor. You fought your way here. I persuaded my warriors to allow me privacy, then I persuaded the guards to sleep. She stepped inside. Director Okonkwo informed me of your detention and the evidence you obtained illegally. Varith, Tekor is working with the Shadow Pact. He planted those explosives. I know. Adrian stopped, you know? I suspected after the maintenance corridor. His hatred was too personal. When you were detained for investigating him, it confirmed what I feared. Her eyes held his. I accessed your confiscated evidence 20 minutes ago. You were correct. Then we need to... I am here to break you out. The treaty signing is in 6 hours. Tekor has positioned his warriors throughout the facility. I believe he intends a coordinated assault that will kill delegates from both sides and ensure war. Adrian's mind raced through tactical options. We need to warn the delegations. They will not listen, not to me, who has been deemed compromised, not to you under arrest for espionage. We have no authority, no backup, and no time. She touched his face, surprisingly gentle. We have only each other. Adrian covered her hand with his. You're throwing away everything. Your position, your standing. I am choosing to stand with someone who sees truth even when it is inconvenient. Someone who taught me that strength means having courage to act when action is required. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. someone I have come to value more than my reputation. Varith, if we do this, there's no going back. I know. Your people will call you traitor. Let them? Her hand slid to his chest over his heart. I am tired of living according to rules that prioritize appearance over substance. You showed me there is more than one way to be strong. Now I choose to be strong your way, by doing what is right regardless of cost. Adrian covered her hand with both of his. Then let's go save this summit. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen, sharp and fierce and beautiful. The weapons locker is 2 corridors east. I have disabled security there. We arm ourselves, we reach the treaty hall before Tekor executes his attack, and we ensure this peace survives. Simple plan. The best plans usually are. She turned toward the door, then looked back. Adrian, when this is over, we will still face consequences. We may be separated, prosecuted, exiled. There are no guarantees beyond this moment. Adrian crossed to her, standing close enough to feel her heat. Then we make this moment count. For 3 heartbeats they stood, warrior and protector, Kryn and human, 2 people who had found something unexpected and chosen to risk everything for it. Then Varith opened the door, and they moved into the corridor together. Behind them, alarms wailed as security systems registered the breach. Ahead, 6 hours remained until the treaty signing. Between them, something had solidified stronger than duty or culture or fear, a partnership forged in violence and tempered by choice. They reached the weapons locker and armed themselves in silence, Adrian taking his compact rifle and sidearm, Varith selecting ancient deadly blades. When ready, she turned with that fierce smile. Stay close to me, Adrian Cole, and do not die. I find I have developed a strong preference for keeping you alive. Feelings mutual, Ambassador. Not Ambassador anymore, just Varith. Then just Adrian. They moved into the facility's corridors together, 2 against an army with nothing but trust and 6 hours to save a peace that might already be doomed. Adrian felt Varith's presence beside him, solid and sure and real, and thought maybe 6 hours was enough. Maybe trust was enough. Maybe choosing each other was the only strategy that mattered. The facility's alarm screamed, and somewhere ahead, Tekor prepared his final strike. Adrian and Varith ran toward it together, and neither one looked back. The treaty hall occupied the facility's central atrium, transparent steel walls overlooking the canyon. Adrian and Varith approached through maintenance corridors, moving with the synchronization they'd developed over weeks. Adrian's tactical instincts and Varith's warrior precision had become something formidable despite being outnumbered. They reached the maintenance access with 4 hours until ceremony. Adrian scanned through the grating, counting bodies and marking positions. There. Varith's breath was warm against his ear. Tekor's warriors. 6 positions surrounding the hall, positioned to create crossfire that will kill maximum delegates while appearing to defend against external attack. Adrian saw the tactical brilliance and horror. Tekor had positioned his people to slaughter both delegations and make it look like protection. The Shadow Pact would get their war. We can't stop all 6 before they open fire. No, but we can disrupt their timing. If we strike Tekor first, the others will hesitate. Kryn warriors follow chain of command. Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the warrior markings on her cheek. If this goes wrong, then we die together. She leaned into his touch, but it will not go wrong. I know your combat rhythm as well as my own heartbeat. He kissed her, fierce and desperate and full of everything they hadn't said. Her hand fisted in his hair, pulling him closer, and for 5 heartbeats the mission didn't exist. When they broke apart, Varith's smile was sharp. Now I am motivated to survive. Come, let us kill some traitors. They split up. Adrian took the high position while Varith walked openly through the hall. Adrian watched through his scope as she approached Tekor near the western entrance. He saw Tekor's body language shift to hostile, saw the moment the War Master realized she knew. Tekor's hand moved toward his sidearm. Adrian's finger tightened. The shot took Tekor in the shoulder, spinning him away from Varith. Chaos erupted, delegates scattered, security drew weapons, unsure of the threat. And Tekor's warriors hesitated, uncertain without their leader's command. That hesitation cost them everything. Varith moved like violence given form, closing on the nearest warrior before he could raise his weapon. She caught his arm, twisted with enough force to dislocate the shoulder, used his body as a shield. Adrian dropped the second warrior with a headshot, then tracked the third. The third died before he could fire. The remaining 3 opened fire into chaos, where their targets had already moved. Adrian worked systematically from elevation, providing cover while Varith closed with each warrior. Her combat style had evolved, still powerful, but now incorporating tactical principles Adrian had taught her. The 4th went down when Varith drove a blade through the gap in his armor. The 5th landed a hit on her arm before Adrian's shot took him. The 6th tried to run and made it 3 steps before Varith tackled him hard enough to crack the floor. 90 seconds. 6 warriors neutralized, Tekor bleeding while security secured the scene. Adrian descended, rifle raised. He found Varith standing over Tekor, blade at his throat, blood running down her arm. Her chest heaved with exertion, hair loose, and she looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. Director Okonkwo's voice came through the facility's comm. "Stand down, all personnel stand down." Adrian lowered his rifle slowly. Varith kept her blade at Tekor's throat for 3 heartbeats before stepping back. Okonkwo entered with a security team, his face showing exhaustion and relief. He took in the scene, 6 bodies Tekor restrained, both delegations alive but shaken. "Someone want to explain what the hell just happened?" Adrian stepped forward. War Master Tekor was working with the Shadow Pact. He positioned his warriors to create a massacre that would appear to be an external attack. We stopped him. With evidence you obtained illegally while under arrest. "Sir, I can explain." "Save it." Okonkwo looked at Varith. "Ambassador, you assaulted security and broke a prisoner out of custody." Varith straightened, blood dripping from her arm. "I did, and I would do so again because Agent Cole was correct and your system was too compromised to act in time." Dr. Mendez stepped forward, leaning on a medical crutch. "Director Okonkwo, may I remind you that both these individuals just saved every life in this room. Perhaps we can address procedural violations after we acknowledge that fact." Murmurs of agreement rippled through delegations. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Medical teams, treat the wounded. Security, take Tekor into custody. Adrian, Varith, you're both confined to quarters pending inquiry." He paused. "Off the record, good work." The inquiry took 3 weeks. Adrian sat in holding quarters, staring at the wall and wondering if saving lives was worth ending his career. He decided it absolutely was. The door opened, Varith entered, moving differently now, still powerful but more at ease in her own skin. "They are releasing us." Both governments concluded that while our methods were unorthodox, the threat was legitimate and our actions justified. Relief flooded through Adrian. "You're being reinstated as ambassador?" "No. I have been stripped of my title for insubordination. The sovereignty considers my actions a betrayal of proper warrior protocol." "Varith, I'm sorry." "Do not be. I chose this path knowing the cost." Her hand found his. "Dr. Mendez has requested I remain as a cultural liaison for the peace process. The sovereignty agreed, provided I never return to active military service." "You're staying?" "I am staying, and you?" "Suspended from field duty. Okonkwo suggested I train other agents in unconventional threat assessment." "So we are both relegated to lesser positions by governments that disapprove of our choices." "Looks like it." "Good." Varith's smile was fierce and warm. "Then we have nothing left to prove to anyone but ourselves." She pulled him up and they stood in the small quarters that had become a refuge. Adrian's hands settled on her waist, and Varith's fingers traced the scar through his eyebrow. "My people still believe I weakened myself by choosing you. They think love is a vulnerability warriors cannot afford." "And what do you think?" "I think they are wrong. I think the courage to be vulnerable requires more strength than any combat trial." Her forehead touched his. "I think choosing to trust someone completely is the most powerful thing a warrior can do." Adrian's hands tightened on her waist. "I was terrified of failing again. Terrified that if I let myself care about you, I'd lose you the same way I lost Chen. That my judgment was compromised because I wanted to keep you alive more than I wanted to follow protocol. Your judgment was not compromised, it was clarified. She pulled back to meet his eyes. You saw the truth because you cared enough to look past comfortable lies. That is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of strength that saves lives. He kissed her again, slower this time, tasting certainty and future, and the knowledge that they'd chosen each other over everything their worlds told them mattered. When they broke apart, Varith's expression turned thoughtful. This will not be easy. Our people still struggle to see past old prejudices. We will face opposition, judgment. Probably. And neither of us knows if what we have can survive outside the pressure that forged it. True. But you are willing to try anyway? Adrian took her hand, feeling the warmth and strength of it. I learned something from a wise warrior recently. She told me that some risks are worth taking together. Varith's laugh was rich and genuine, and she pulled him toward the door. Come, let us find out what kind of future two disgraced warriors can build when they refuse to accept the limitations their worlds impose. They walked out together into a facility where the treaty signing was being rescheduled and delegations were learning to see past decades of hatred. Neither knew what came next, whether their relationship would last, whether their peoples would accept what they'd chosen, whether the peace they'd fought for would hold. But as Adrian felt Varith's hand in his and saw the determined set of her shoulders, he thought maybe the uncertainty was the point. Maybe strength wasn't about knowing the future, but about choosing to face it anyway, together, with someone who understood that vulnerability and power were not opposites, but partners. The facility's windows showed the canyon landscape stretching into distance, empty space that Varith had once called maddening and now seemed full of possibility. They stood there for a moment, warrior and protector, Kryn and human, two people who had learned that love was not a weakness to be guarded against, but a strength to be claimed. And then they walked forward into whatever came next, together,